Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books, and today we're here to review Of Empires and Dust by Ryan Cahill. I'd like to set the scene, if I may, before I delve deep into this review. This will be a non-spoiler review, so I won't be spoiling anything specifically in Of Empires and Dust. However, to discuss Of Empires and Dust, I do need to discuss major plot elements from previous books. I will try not to, excessively spoil those books, so that if you are the kind of person who's happy with a spoiler-like experience, you can probably watch this video. The one thing I'm going to caveat is that if there are major plot elements that might, books might pivot around, I may need to discuss those in order to talk about this one. When I previously reviewed Bound and the Broken books, I have reviewed the first three main books on my channel, three of the first videos I made, and one of the biggest problems with those videos and why I don't like to circulate them, I haven't taken them down, but I don't like to share them, is because I was so spoiler averse. I wasn't even talking about characters because I didn't want people to know that those characters survived the previous books and that sort of thing, and I am going to do this time. I'm going to talk about characters. I basically just did 3 videos on vibes, and they're terrible. They're quite bad reviews. One day I will reread this series and we will re-review it. Some more background. The Bound and the Broken, of which this is book 4 in the series, is my favourite fantasy series of all time. This book hasn't changed that, so if that gives you a little bit of a preview as to how much I enjoyed this book, I hope it does. I've got a glass of whiskey today in Ryan's honour because I know he's a big whiskey guy. And I want to talk specifically about this book, obviously. That's the subject of this video. But I would like to kind of frame this past me saying it's my favourite series of all time, by also talking a little bit about Of War and Ruin, the previous book in the series, which I've said many, many, many times is one of the best books I've ever read, and is probably the only, or one of the only books that I've ever read where I felt like I kind of put it down and was like, if Goodreads could let you give 6 out of 5 stars, this book would earn it. Of Empires and Dust it's kind of War and Ruin 2. So obviously it is the next book in the series. There was a novella in between, but this is the next major book. And it's of similar size and similar scope. There are a few new elements to this book, which I think are absolutely for the best. These are really good ideas, and really good big developments in the world of the story. But it felt very much to me like Of War and Ruin was so good, let's do that again. And I absolutely agree. I think that Of Empires and Dust is a fantastic book. I ended up giving this one a 5-star, and this is not one that I would go out of my way to say I think this should be a 6-star book. And this is really interesting because I think that this book never really puts a foot wrong. There's nothing wrong with this book, and that's why I think that it's still a 5-star book for me, even though I didn't enjoy it as much as Of War and Ruin. But Of War and Ruin was a real surprise in terms of the quality jump from book 2 to book 3, whereas this is very much just as good as book 3. Does that make sense? This is the second book that Ryan has done at this massive length, and at this enhanced, increased scope. And one of the things that I think that you get from that is, because we've seen this scope before, we've seen this size of story before, this one is less of a holy shit, he's really done it, and more of a he's done this before, and it's very weird to be almost to be giving a minor knock to a book because it is just excellent and isn't massively surpassing my expectations. My expectations for this book were sky high. This has been my number one most anticipated book since reading of War and Ruin in 2023. So it's been like 2 years since that this book has been literally number one with a bullet on my TBR, and that, like, I can tell you how much of number one with a bullet it is. The second that it arrived in my inbox was like, I feel like it was like 10 or 11 in the morning, and I literally dropped work and took my hour's lunch break at like 10 a.m. so that I could start reading this book as soon as physically possible. The interesting thing about this book as well is that it is a bit of a slower start than I think that we're used to from Ryan. And I think also one of the big things from Ryan is that we have, if you are kind of binge reading these books, this is, he kind of takes his foot off the pedal at the beginning to allow things to line up. And one of the things that I felt in the very, very opening of this book was I was like, so much big stuff had happened in Of War and Ruin, and I was kind of waiting for something big to happen, and nothing that is massive happens right away. The book kind of starts to form around a search for a MacGuffin. That is kind of a big part of the first half of the book, is that the discussion is around this MacGuffin, the Heart of the Blood, or the Heart of Blood. And everyone is looking for this MacGuffin. And I was almost, in this first half of the book, being a bit like, a MacGuffin book? Like, that seems a bit below Ryan's capability. Does that make sense? Like, he's written 3 excellent books, and I don't think any of them are like MacGuffin books. They all have like really interesting macro and micro stories. I actually had I did the latest episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy, which is Philip Chase's interview podcast. I did that on the weekend, and we talked a little bit about this there, that Ryan is kind of really, really excellent at, and I think maybe one of the best at that I have read, at layering the macro and the micro story. So the micro story might, for example, be Cahill is sad that his brother is dead in book 1, and then the macro story is like the death of Cahill's brother leads to this, him having a different approach to these certain things, and then when Cahill kind of becomes the chosen one, he's got this kind of thought or this vibe or this feeling of his brother and what his brother would have done, what his brother wants, what his brother, he has this role model in his brother, and very much the whole time when there is an interesting element in the macro story, in the big overarching plot, there is always a personal element, and there wasn't initially with the Heart of Blood, and I was very kind of like, it felt odd. It felt like the kind of writing that you might see from early Ryan, not current Ryan. And I thought that was quite interesting. And we then, when there's kind of like a culmination point around the halfway point, where there's kind of a major step taken by the characters and a return to a famous location. And when this happens, that feels like where the story like truly kicked off. And again, it stopped being about the let's chase the MacGuffin, and it very much for me became a ton of intermingling personal stories. This book also contains a couple of confrontations that I have been looking forward to for the entire series, which did not disappoint. Really, really loved the way they played out. And this book was lighter on some of my favourite characters, like Aeson. Like Aeson actually does not have much page time in this book. The one caveat to that is that we are just coming straight off of the ice, where he is the main point of view. And an interesting thing about the ice is that the ice kind of takes Aeson from being this statue. You know, he's Aeson is like a statue. He's like a constant for this series. He is this kind of stoic stone, kind of up on a pedestal. You know, he doesn't feel. He feels like a real character, but until you see his point of view in the ice and his point of view, and I talked to Philip about this as well, but Aeson specifically as a parent, I think that is really, really, it really grounds him and really fleshes him fully out. So one of the biggest themes in this series is loss. It's called The Bound and the Broken, and to extrapolate that out, it is, the dragon bound and those who are broken, who've had their bonds broken. And there are many bonds that break in this series, and it isn't just the dragon bonds. We've also have bonds of friendship, bonds of family, that are broken. We have some really interesting reconciliations in this book. We have returning, as I said, returning to these iconic locations, and it's a really, really interesting book, and I have to say I'll be really looking forward to watching some spoiler discussions on this book to see what other people thought. I am currently the only kind of, I don't know, that I when this video goes up, there are only 2 other reviews on BookTube, like, at all. A lot of people are waiting for the physical version. I know specifically that holding a physical book up in your video reviews thumbnails does very well. It's dumb, but it does, and so I know a lot of people will wait for physical copies to be with them. I know a lot of people I've talked to have said, "Oh, I'm going to read it when I get the physical," but I literally could not wait. I will order the physical, though I'm not sure whether I'm going to wait for the reprinted broken binding editions, because I think those covers might be more interesting. Anyway, moving on. We're not talking about book covers here, we're talking about books. So, I'll have a little cheers. Yeah, it's a really good book. And I think that one of the biggest hallmarks for me of a book that I truly love, that I think is excellent, is that I actually have a lot of nitpicks. Especially with series that I truly love. So I can sit down and I can nitpick a book in the Wheel of Time. I can sit down and I can nitpick this book because otherwise how am I going to fill a 20-minute video? And I do like my reviews to be 20 minutes or more. And B, I feel like because I love it so much, I have such a strong connection to it, and it makes me I can think about the emotions I felt while I read through it, and it's a really interesting reading process for me with this book as well, because I got the book when did I get the book? I got it probably a month early from release, so I got it kind of the first I got it the first week of March, and it released the very end of March. And I had been in a bit of a reading slump before, where I had been kind of struggling to get stuff read, and I had found that without an audio book, my reading was really, really slow. And I was finding that with of Empires and Dust as well, and I was thinking to myself, is this because I'm in a slump? Is this because this book isn't as good as I was hoping? And I did sit down and I examined it at about 40% in, which took me like over a week. And we're talking about, I read Of War and Ruin in like 5 days, and that's 1,500 pages. Same with Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, read that in like 5 days. One of the things with Of Empires and Dust was I did kind of sit down and examine and go like, is this not meeting my expectations? And I think if I roll back, so I got to the halfway point a few days after that, and when I got to that halfway point, there is a really great sequence at the halfway, and that kind of killed the slump, if that makes sense. And it was definitely a reading slump. I don't think it's anything to do with the book in and of itself. I did say earlier that that first 30% is a bit of a slower pace, but I think that will really, really work for you if you're binge reading this series, because of how fast and hype the end of War and Ruin and the whole of the ice was. So yes, it is a little bit of a slower beginning, but I think there's a lot to cover and there's a lot to talk about. And when I say slower, I don't mean that, it's just people sitting around having coffee and talking about how the grass grows. It is, it's full of really deep personal conversations. It's full of Cahill really running through his feelings, Dan running through his feelings, and some genuine moments of real emotion come very early on. One of the big things and big themes of this book is that Cahill is this all-important messiah figure who is being pulled in all these directions. So everybody wants him to go, I need you to go here. I need you to talk to this person, recruit them for the rebellion. I need you to go to this city and protect them from the dragon guard. And he's kind of pulled in all of these directions, and he doesn't know which way is best. He has this feeling, he's like, and a lot of the time, he ends up making sacrifices on what he really wants so that he can do what he feels is right. And not always do those decisions come out in the way that he wants. And I think that that's really good. And I liked the way that Ryan portrayed Cahill in these moments, and we got to see a lot of these moments from other people's points of view. There's a really fantastic chapter from the point of view of Chora, and she and the way that she sees Cahill. I really liked that chapter, and we get another kind of similar one from Corin later on in the book, like how she sees the events of what's going on and the characters that we know and love. We do get quite a lot of points of view in this book that are non-traditional. So there's probably like 10 to 15 big major characters, but then there's like 10 or so more smaller, not minor, but like smaller characters who have been important for sections, who become more important in this book. And we also get to see their points of view like for the first time. And one of the things that I really liked about that was, so we have these points of view from these characters, but oftentimes we were seeing the characters that we know and love from those points of view. One of the interesting things as well is that we have Rist, who is in the Imperial Army, and there's a great sequence where we get the view of Rist, and we get the view of Rist's characters from the points of view of characters from the rebellion, which I loved, and kind of similar from the other way around as well, which really, really worked. Ryan does the thing that Sanderson really amped up to 900 miles per hour in Wind and Truth, which is he often will switch POV mid-chapter. He doesn't do this excessively. You'll often, in like maybe a big battle sequence, you'll have a few points of view in that battle, and he will shift from one to the other. He also does something that I really like, which is where if the battle or the like action sequence shifts he will start a new chapter. And I love that. I often see this in books where I'm like, I really want to put the book down for 5 minutes, but I don't like putting it down like in the middle of a chapter. So I want to get to the end of a chapter. And Ryan will do stuff like there'll be a action sequence with Cahill on Dragonback, and then he'll get off of Viserys and go like hand to hand, and those will be 2 chapters. Even though they're like the same sequence, kind of, they end up being 2 chapters, and I love that. I think that's a really fantastic idea, and I hope Ryan keeps it up, especially as we go into this final book, which will be coming in the next couple of years, which will end the series. And this final book obviously will be very much like the big exploding, everything's on fire ending. And it's quite interesting as well because this book is a bit darker than the previous books. The thing that I would say about Ryan is that his books are not grimdark, not at all. But what I would say is that they are dark, and they feel real without being gratuitous. So I hope that makes sense in terms of where I place those books. There is a lot of swearing in this book. It's quite funny. I think that there probably was a lot of swearing previously, but I had just kind of like blanked it out. If you're like mega anti-swearing, you might get a bit put up by that. But while sometimes it takes me out when someone takes me out of the story when someone uses a very modern way of like swearing. But that I don't think I could even remember that happening more than once or twice. There were a lot of sections that I like chuckled or laughed at. Dan in particular is a very funny character, and Ryan having a good strong sense of humour and being quite a funny guy, I think really helps him writing Dan, because you often see this with authors that you're like, you are not that funny as an author, so your funny characters aren't funny. This is something that I am sad to say I do feel about Brandon Sanderson, who's one of my favourite authors. I don't find his comic relief characters very funny, whereas Dan in The Bound and the Broken has a ton of good laughs. And I think the thing that Ryan does really well is jokes from the characters that don't make jokes. So you will often get a character who is very stoic and very, hard and very serious. And when one of those characters cracks a joke, that really gets me every single time. We've come also to the point where my favourite characters are changing from page to page. There are no point of views that I dislike, like not one single one. There are a few points of view that I wish we had seen more of. The one, I think my biggest criticism for this book is, like I said, that the opening is a little slower. It's hard to even call that a criticism, but it's something that I was thinking as I read it, was thinking like, this is a bit slower than Of War and Ruin. But, like that was like the mid-season finale, as Ryan said, whereas this is really setting us up for the end of this series. And we move to kind of, Ryan's kind of taking a step from the level of story that we're at, and he hasn't put his foot down into the next level of storytelling, the like next increased scope, but he's kind of halfway there. He's about to put that foot down and he's about to take that step, but he's not all the way there yet. And I think that this book doesn't suffer for that, really. I think that this is giving us a really strong progression from one level of story to the next. But the other complaint I kind of have, and it's interesting because I hadn't thought about, I didn't think this while reading the book, but I thought about it afterwards, was that Dane and the Voltaren characters feel quite separate from the main story. And I think that it doesn't help that in this particular book, the antagonist for Dane and his set of characters is not really the same, doesn't feel like the same antagonist as the rest of the book. It feels disconnected. And one of the issues, I guess, is like geographical, in that Voltara is a, like, I don't know what the term is. It's like the end of a country, like Cornwall or whatever. It's out on the end, and there is a very specific like gate and mountain range that stops it from being accessed by the rest of the country. But I do wish that their story felt a bit more joined up. I would imagine that that is going to be a big thing in the final book, but I am surprised that, like, Dane has only really met a couple of characters. Dane is incredibly important in the page time in the books. Like, Dane's story and the Voltaran story has a lot of page time, but it's interesting that I think basically only Aeson has met those characters, and only met them in this book. Well, he's known Dane before, but like, you get what I mean. And I do wish that he had connected up a bit more with the rest of the characters. Again, every single thing that I have that I'm like, this is my criticism, is like a nitpick. It's very much a like, this is the best pizza I've eaten, but the dip could have been better. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of where I want to point you towards, in that, like, Of War and Ruin, like I said, excelled on every factor, and also was a huge surprise and a huge step up from the previous book, which in and of itself was a huge step up from the book before. This book was less surprising. There were some really good surprising story elements, but the quality of the book was less surprising, and like, Ryan's ability to execute was very much, I'd seen it before. Like I said at the beginning, this kind of feels like Of War and Ruin 2. And I don't think that that is a bad thing, seeing as Of War and Ruin is one of the best books I have ever read. And I would still wholeheartedly recommend this series, without a shadow of a doubt. Very, 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 to me, high quality, incredible. The character moments in this book, there were some really big character moments, and the way that Ryan writes about loss and grief, very, very poignant and heartfelt, and in a couple of occasions, kind of got to me. You know, I was feeling the goosebumps. I was, there's a couple of times where I almost wanted to raise a glass to the characters in the book. And then finally, one last thing that I wanted to talk about was the endings. So in previous books, we've kind of had like one big climax for the series, you know? So maybe we might have, like, the Voltarans have their story climax, and then Cahill and his crew have theirs. But this time, like, the last 30% of the book was basically story crescendo after crescendo after crescendo, and it worked incredibly well. It absolutely had me gripped. Like I said previously, it took me like a couple of weeks to read the first 40%, and I read the last 60 in like a week, even less than that maybe. And like, I was basically reading 10% of the book a day, and like chugging through it, absolutely chugging. And like, I often get too tired to read in the evenings at like 10 o'clock at night, because I've been like busy and blah blah blah. But with Of War and Ruin, like, I read past midnight, not Of War and Ruin, of Empires and Dust, I read past midnight multiple times, because I was so into the book, it's so absorbing, that it like, it was like keeping me awake, and that never happens, like, never. Even reading some of my favourite books of all time, I have gotten tired at 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11 at the latest. But I frequently would look at my watch and be like, oh shit, it's almost midnight, and then I would keep reading. So I hope that that has told you how I feel about the book. I hope that I've got across my love for this book, while also that it was not a perfect book, and it didn't surprise me as much as Of War and Ruin. So I hope that that kind of all makes sense. I actually managed to very, very much not spoil anything in the book or the previous books, really, so glad about that. And yeah, I'm going to finish this glass of whiskey. I'm going to edit this video, and then you guys are going to be able to watch it at like 10 o'clock. So US audience, great timing for you guys, perfect. UK audience, I'll see you tomorrow. I hope you guys have had a lovely video watching experience. If you have liked this video, please do me a favour and click the like button down below. While you're on the way to give that like, you can also drop a comment. Let me know if you have read of Empires and Dust, or you're excited about reading it, or your thoughts on Bound and the Broken in general. And please do also subscribe to the channel if you haven't. We've got a lovely little community here built around fantasy and science fiction book reviews and discussions. I'd love to have you as a member if this is your first video of mine. And one final thank you to Ryan. So number one, thank you for writing such an excellent book and for writing my favourite series of all time. And on top of that, thanks so much for the review copy. I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on a physical one in the future. Thanks so much for watching, and I will speak to you on Wednesday.